Hello everyone, welcome again. This is my spoiler discussion on Us. If you don't want spoilers, do not watch this video. Before I start interpreting the themes of the film and what it all means or might mean, I just want to address what I said in the last video about how some of the tension was killed, not by the humor, but by the lack of consequences. This movie could be separated into 3 acts. The first act is the prologue and the setup when we are introduced to Aid's past and meet the family. I really like how a lot of the things introduced here come back in the second and third act, like Jason's mask, magic trick, and getting trapped in the closet, the faults in the boat, the flare gun, the daughter being a runner, etc. Anyways, that's all beside the point, as in the second act is when shit goes down, and that can be divided into 2 set pieces. The first is the funny games-like sequence where the doubles play with the family in various different ways. These scenes are all very tense, but ultimately our family escapes unscathed. There are no consequences, and it almost is a little too easy that they got away. Then we have the second set piece where the other family is killed very quickly. The main family goes into the house with a bunch of murderous doppelgangers, and the 2 children go upstairs where these murderous doppelgangers are, armed with makeshift weapons, which is a very stupid thing to do. And I knew watching this that they weren't going to come into any harm and they were just going to kick ass. And that's a problem. The tension is effectively lost from this moment onward. Now, that being said, I love both of these set pieces, and it was incredibly satisfying to see the characters go into the second family's home and kick doppelganger ass. I spent way too much time reading up theories about this movie on Reddit. There are a lot of different interpretations about this movie, and none of them are really wrong, and all are kind of valuable ways to look at the film. So I figured I would kind of compile all the different theories and interpretations I've read on Reddit, including my own thoughts, and break them down. I've put these theories into 3 categories. The what the hell is going on theories, which try to explain surface level elements of the plot and world building. The social commentary theories, which interpret the movie based on what it is trying to say about society. And the existential theories, which interpret the movie, well, existentially, and about what it means to be us. So let's get into it. Okay, it is here where I have my major problem of the movie. In the third act of the film, we get an exposition dump from raspy voiced Aid, Aid that lived underground, we'll just call her Aid number 2 for now, about how the Tethered were an abandoned mind control project by the government and that their function was supposed to control people above ground, but that it failed and that the Tethered were abandoned to just live in the underground tunnels. This expositional monologue does not work for many reasons. First of all, we found out that Aid number 2 used to be above ground, so it doesn't make sense for her to know all this, let alone feel the need to explain all this to Aid number 1, who presumably should know all this because she's the original Tethered. Secondly, this whole government conspiracy doesn't make any sense. Sure, okay, it was a failed mind control experiment, so the scientists just abandoned them. I feel like if this was a huge secret experiment, they would have gotten rid of every trace of it and would have just killed all the Tethers and closed up the tunnels. So that doesn't really make any sense. There are a lot of other things that don't make sense with this plot, like how clean the tunnel was, even with a bunch of rabbits everywhere. The biggest question I have though is how the Tethered were wearing clothes that imitate their above ground counterparts. Where did they get those? Honestly, that scene probably would have worked better if the Tethered were all in nondescript clothing or uniforms, and when the dad displays the Thriller t-shirt, it's so that the Tethered dad holds up nothing. It just all falls apart the more you think about it. Apparently in the version shown to test audiences, this whole speech didn't take place, and you know, I would have preferred that so much more. You don't try to logically explain shit when there is no logical explanation. I watch a lot of weird movies, and a lot of these movies are surreal and follow dream logic. I accept the logic in those because they never try to rationalize it. I wish Us was more dreamlike and surreal and didn't have any explanation for the Tethered. I think that would fix a lot of problems. But don't worry, all these inconsistencies can be explained away if we just consider that Aid number 2 is an unreliable narrator who is just speculating about the origin of the Tethered. It's possible that after spending so many years down there with her mind broken, she began to believe that she was an original Tethered, which would explain why she never mentions the fact that the switch occurred throughout the movie. You'd think if she remembered that above ground aide number 1, brutally choked her out and handcuffed her in the underground, she would have said something to the effect of, "This is my revenge." She makes a broad kind of speech about how the underground people are taking revenge on the above grounds for controlling them against their will, but never makes any specific reference to what aide number 1 did to her. It's possible that once she was stuck underground, she didn't know anything about the tethered, but only speculated that it was a failed government experiment, perhaps getting the idea from popular culture. We do see a Chud VHS in her house at the opening of the film, which is a film that deals with underground humanoid creatures created by government negligence. Well, this is my personal headcanon, but the fact I had to kind of make these mental leaps to make sense of it all, I still think that the film would have greatly improved if they didn't try to explain that shit. I also think it would have been more realistic if aide number 2 had a line acknowledging the switch, even just something a little vague. There's already so much foreshadowing the twist that probably wouldn't have mattered that much if there was just a line like, "This is for what you did to me," or whatever. I also just want to quickly address another theory I've been hearing thrown around, which is the theory that Jason was also switched. I don't buy it. I think the reason that Jason was able to control his tethered was because he was the only one to actually play with the tethered, and he was kind of able to figure out how to do it during that interaction. It's also possible that because he was a hybrid child between a tethered and a non-tethered person, he was more in tune to shit. And the reason why the older daughter didn't have these powers was just age. It's a common trope that children are more in tune to the spirit world in horror, so I'm pretty sure that's just what's happening here. If Jason really was replaced with his tether the last year they went to the beach house, then he would have been mute after the switch. But there's nothing suggesting that something like that happened. I get where some people are coming from, as there is some evidence that there is something up with Jason, but there's just too much evidence to the contrary for me to believe that he is an original tethered just like aide number 1 is. Unlike Get Out, Us's social commentary is not readily apparent. Racial differences, while touched upon briefly with the juxtaposition of the leading black family with the white family, are not the centerpiece of this movie, as everyone of all races are attacked by their doppelgangers, suggesting a more widespread issue in society. To me, this is the problem of poverty and of the failed American dream. I think the major themes of this movie are most formally addressed in aide number 2's monologue when they first invade the house. She juxtaposes her life living underground with aide number 1's above ground life. Even though they have similar events happening to them at the same time, aide number 2's life has been miserable due to her circumstances. Instead of falling in love herself, she mates with a man of necessity, just because her above ground counterpart has fallen in love. This to me seems like a metaphor for poverty and how many people living below the poverty line are exactly like us, though we ignore them. Aide number 2 also mentions feeling entitled to a life that aide number 1 has. This feeling of entitlement to these things is made stronger by the fact that they were switched. This seems to represent the falsehood of the American dream. The underground people could be seen as a metaphor for all those other Americans that pursued the American dream but were not able to climb the social ladder. And the fact that there was a switch also suggests that some people have been actually brought down the social ladder by some unexpected circumstances. This theme is also explored by comparing the leading black family with the white family. Throughout the first half of the movie, Winston Duke's character constantly tries to keep up with the wealth of his friend, played by Tim Heidecker. Ironically, Duke's character may feel inadequate monetarily, but he actually has a much better family life when compared to Moss and Heidecker's failing marriage and their bratty twin daughters. In a way, Winston Duke's character is kind of like the underground people, who we see imitating what the above ground people do. For the underground people, this imitation is very literal and something that they are kind of mindless towards, and they just kind of do, as their above ground counterparts are just controlling them. With the addition of Winston Duke's character, this seems to be more of a metaphor for how we tend to pretend that we're better off than we actually are. The reason that the underground people are unable to control the above ground people is because they have no agency. Without agency or a will to live, all we can hope to do is imitate what we think we're supposed to do. By having us root for a middle-class family, Peele suggests that while poverty is a real and major problem facing America today, material wealth is not worth it if you don't have strong and happy relationships with your loved ones. So how can we stop poverty? Peele suggests that this is going to take more than just people coming together to hold hands. The Hands Across America movement, which aide number 2 takes inspiration from as an optimistic child, ended up being a huge mess, as most of the money raised did not go towards fighting poverty, but rather to operations costs. Despite people joining together across the nation, it ultimately had a minimal effect on the state of poverty and largely became forgotten until Peele brought it up again in this movie. Perhaps trying to change society is futile. The mention of top secret government testing may not be meant to be taken literally, but rather is about how the government would rather have us ignore the issue of poverty and would rather have us not being able to empathize with them emotionally, despite them being just like us. You get it? It's the title of the movie. With any movie about doppelgangers, there is bound to be an existential undertone about what makes you you. In the case of Us, Peele explores whether we would still be who we are if we were born under different circumstances, and how much these circumstances and our ability to overcome or change them affect who we are. Despite Aid being originally a tethered, she still is the same loving mother and wife that we were introduced to in the first half of the film. Perhaps Peele is suggesting that no matter where we come from, it is who we define ourselves as now that matters. Yet, at the same time, the events of the movie suggest that our past will always come back to haunt us. Above ground Aid appears to be someone who was successful in climbing the social ladder and had to hurt some people to get where she is today, and is therefore living in guilt and existential confusion about who she really is. The real twist of the movie is how brutally she had to bring Aid 2 down, choking out her vocal cords and cuffing her in the underground. By having the reveal at the end, Peele ultimately has us sympathize with someone who is capable of doing such a thing throughout the whole movie. While I am of the opinion that having this reveal occur earlier would have benefited the movie and allowed for the consequences of the switch to be more thoroughly explored, I can see why Peele decided to have the reveal at the end in order to pull the rug from under the viewers. It could be argued that one major theme of the film is that we are our own worst enemy. The tagline, "Watch Yourself," seems to exemplify this. Peele brings us back to the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like that work, Peele shows the duality of people in a literal sense by dividing them into two. Of course, with the switch occurring, Peele suggests that it's not as simple as a good self and a bad self, but rather good and bad capable of existing within each half. So who is the real enemy in Us? Is it the government? While the government might be the cause of the tether, their physical absence in the story appears to indicate that though the government can be negligent, it's not an active enemy. The real enemy in Us is the tethered, who are representative of our shadow selves. The self that is filled with guilt, regrets, grief, depression, anxiety, anger, resentment for society, aggression, etc. This is the aspect of the self that Peele warns us to watch, and it could easily take over our lives if we let it. The Heidecker and Moss family had these aspects of themselves take over long ago, and so they were quickly killed and completely replaced with their shadow selves. I have a confession to make. You know how I said in my non-spoiler review of Us that I raised its rating from an 8 to a 9? Well, during the writing of the script for this part of the video, I actually lowered that rating down to a 7. I realized that unlike in my other reviews, I wasn't really excited to make this video anymore and was really only doing so because I wrote half the script already and promised it in my non-spoiler review. As I thought about the movie more and more, the bad began to outweigh the good and the score dropped. I know this might make me seem flighty in my rating, but for some movies, ratings could change drastically over time and with rewatches, and that is exactly what happened with Us. Now don't get me wrong, I still like the film, and I am still excited to see what Peele does next, and I would still recommend it and consider it worth the watch, but I doubt I will be watching it again. Thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Like and comment on the video, let me know what your thoughts and theories are on Us, and please consider subscribing. Stay weird, folks. Bye-bye.